Welcome, everyone. I think we will wait 2 more seconds. We see we still have some people coming in. And I hope you're having a good week, the World Water Week. I hope you're enjoying. Everything's going well. Are you attending many interesting sessions? So I can say that welcome to the last session of the seminar series on innovation and the geopolitics of water. And I think those of you who were with us yesterday, you saw that we had an extremely interesting session with many new entry points to these kind of discussions. And we had a very good panel. And I do promise you that today will not disappoint you. And just to recap, this seminar series, it's a seminar series organized by the Scientific Program Committee. It's a group of experts that contributes to the theme, the overall theme of the World Water Week. So you can look at the program and then you will see they are called SIWI Seminars. And we work for about 1 year on preparing the seminar. So it's a little bit different than the other sessions. And each seminar has 3 parts. And this seminar, the co-conveners are the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Finnish Water Forum, also the United States Institute of Peace, International Crisis Group, and also the World Meteorological Organization. And this particular session is brought to you by the United States Institute of Peace and the International Crisis Group. But without any further ado, just one thing, we really feel that we would like to have more diverse audience because we do understand that there are lots of people from the water community listening to this, but we also see that there are many issues that relate to other sectors related to water. So if you have, for example, friends who work in foreign ministries, Olivia is a young scientific program committee member who's been working with us on preparing this session. And Olivia, she will tell you what she has planned for you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Maybe the slides will come up on the screen. My name is Olivia Schad, and I am a hazard mitigation planner with Michael Baker International in the United States. But as Martina said, I am also serving today as a young scientific program committee member, which just means that I, alongside my co-YSPC Lama, who you will be introduced to later, have had the privilege of working alongside Martina and Aaron, the SPC leads for this seminar series, as well as our amazing co-conveners to organize these 3 sessions, Innovation and the Geopolitics of Water. Like Martina said, we have been planning for months and months for these seminars, but you can only plan so much. You can invite speakers to come and you can write run of shows and you can create questions, but we don't write anybody's scripts. We don't know what people are going to say in the discussions that are going to be had. And I have been so excited and challenged, and I have learned so much from the previous 2 sessions, the conversations that I've had on stage, the questions that have been asked, and the case studies that have been presented. And I'm so excited for that to continue into today's session. Before I get too far into the recap of the previous 2 sessions, I wanted to zoom out and look at the theme of the week in the context of what we're talking about today, innovation and the geopolitics of water. So as we heard yesterday, World Water Week 2023, Seeds of Change, Innovative Solutions for a Water-Wise World. The organizers of this week said it is an opportunity to usher in an era of innovation and rethinking related to how we use, value, and manage water. For this, we need new incentives and innovations, building on the latest scientific knowledge and best practices from around the world. They continue to say that we live in an era of unprecedented scientific advances and collaboration, and with technology available that makes it possible to solve previously unsolvable problems. But we need a broader kind of innovation, one that integrates behavioral change, governance, and systems thinking. World Water Week 2023 will plant these seeds of change. I want to break this down even further and ask 3 questions. And throughout my short presentation, you'll see that I really like asking questions. So the first, what do we mean by innovation? Innovation means doing existing work better, doing good work more, and not being afraid to do work differently. How are these results be used? Well, if we look around the room, that's kind of up to us. It's in our hands now. Who must be involved? It is crucial that innovation processes include gender perspectives and are open to people from all age groups and backgrounds. That is why I'm very honored and thankful to be able to stand here as a young professional and be involved in these discussions and be involved in these innovative processes. So I challenge you as we move forward into this session to think about these 3 questions in the context of what we're talking about. So let's take a look at our previous 2 sessions. The first day, hydrological data, innovation, and new technologies. We talked about how we are entering a different world with a lot of data. We heard from tech companies, public and private sector about what data can do, and we heard from everyone about the commitment to open source data and the importance of data accessibility. Linking us back to the original theme, we asked participants who attended day 1 2 questions. The first, in one word, what is the main takeaway from this session? Some of the words that we collected were collaboration, weaving, hope, and commitment. The second question we asked was, what was the one exciting seed of change that stood out from this seminar? Some answers: data management, critical thinking and historical knowledge, explore, test, fail fast, and redo differently, as there is no time. Change of mindset, acceleration is needed. A public-private partnership plays a pivotal role in advancing the cause of transboundary water management, thereby safeguarding our invaluable global water resources and promoting the collective welfare of agricultural and marginalized communities. And finally, in the last moments of this session, the idea of a code of ethics was mentioned, a code of ethics whose relevance is often underestimated. And also, and a final comment, how to manage the costs for data providers. This leads us into session 2, where we answered the question of digital diplomacy. In an era of global disruption, how is technology changing the paths to peace and water security? We talked about standards, if there are any, for monitoring and evaluating how data is used and managed, and where the accountability is. We talked about the risk around uncertainty and how there might be a lot of data available, but is it reaching the right people? Another topic was capacity building on the ground, building bridges between local and governments. We moved into talking about problems that arise when we have data-driven approaches without political minds involved, and when we don't have policy around who is collecting data and who is using data. We also heard from one of our panelists, Salanga Mishra, about how we need to stop looking at water as a problem and start looking at it as a solution and a path to peace building. Of course, I'm only scratching the surface of the conversations that were had in the previous 2 sessions, so I do recommend looking back at the recordings to get a full picture of what we've talked about. But again, at the end of this session, we asked our participants the same 2 questions. In one word, what was the main takeaway from the session? And what was the one exciting seed of change that stood out from this seminar? Some of the words collected were, apart from AI, ground truth is important, and another major theme of collaboration. Some exciting seeds that were planted. Data can be used in positive way to resolve conflict. Data is powerful for decision making, but it is not neutral, so we need to work together to define standards for interpretation. And finally, new ways of diplomacy. At the very end of yesterday's session, Aaron, who you'll be introduced to later, asked one of the participants, Sarah, a question about how this influences young professionals' perspective in their careers moving forward. And that question really struck me. This isn't something that's far off in the future. This is something for the now, and something that we as young professionals get to have a role in. Like I said, that is why I'm so excited to be at the table today for these innovative discussions. In preparation for this session, our team asked our cohort of young professionals, again, 2 questions, but different ones this time. The first, what are your hopes and fears regarding the increasing use of technology and digital advancements in managing shared water resources and addressing water security challenges? And second, as a young person concerned about water security and digital change, what policy recommendations would you propose to decision makers to ensure a more inclusive and sustainable approach to water management and the use of technology? And as we move into today's discussion, I want to leave you with some of the ideas that they shared. Some of the hopes: a comprehensive database, a hope for transparency and accuracy, and a hope for improved resource management. Some of the fears: a fear of private sector disuse, a fear of digital colonialism, a fear of increasing inequity, a fear of data privacy and security issues, and a fear of expertise and time required. Moving into the policy recommendations, there were recommendations for open source and publicly managed data, recommendations toward equitable technology access, towards data compensation and privacy, towards promoting simple interventions, technology procurement and quality, digital literacy and access, and finally, community engagement participation. So at the end of today's session, we're going to ask you the same 2 questions that we asked our previous participants. So I want you to keep this in mind as we go through our conversation with our panelists later. What is one word that you would describe today's session? And then what are some exciting seeds that have been planted? So we'll put this QR code again up at the end of the session, but I just want to have you think about that as we move forward. So now I want to pass it over to Kaylee Ober, a senior program officer for the Climate, Environment, and Conflict Program at the United States Institute of Peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olivia, for such a comprehensive overview of the last 2 sessions. Definitely not an easy task, and you've done such a great job. I want to apologize in advance that I'm the 3rd opening remark for this panel. I promise I won't keep you too much from our distinguished panel. As Olivia mentioned, I'm from the United States Institute of Peace, or USIP. We are a co-convener of this session, along with the International Crisis Group, as Martina mentioned. For those of you who are not familiar with USIP, we're a national, nonpartisan, independent institute founded by Congress and dedicated to the proposition that a world without violent conflict is possible. Our Climate, Environment, and Conflict Program recently established a thematic pillar on transboundary water and conflict issues, and this is why I'm here. Just a few examples of our work thus far. We've provided analysis on a variety of issues, including those related to technology, especially understanding the secondary or tertiary effects of tech on conflict related to water. This year, I published a piece on cryptocurrency and its relation to the energy-water conflict nexus in Central Asia, for example. We're also especially interested in ensuring that our research is practical and operational. For example, we've recently commissioned research on understanding the effectiveness of conflict resolution mechanisms in transboundary water agreements. The literature shows us that these mechanisms may be helpful, but often these reflections are very general or vague, and so we really want to understand the mechanics of what makes these mechanisms truly work or not, and have the U.S. Institute of Peace be a player with ensuring that these do mitigate and mediate conflicts related to water. Like I said, the session's co-convener, the International Crisis Group, has also launched a new line of work on water and conflict. In particular, they're working on reducing tensions between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia around the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. They'll shortly have a report coming out on this. They've also recently started work on conflict risks in the lower Mekong River Basin, which they will also publish a report about shortly. That's to say that we are both committed to continuing to work on water and conflict issues and building peace, and see it as a central part of our mission to build and sustain peace. So if you'll allow me a few quick reflections from someone from a peace builder's perspective, not necessarily a water technical perspective. As Olivia said, we really believe that data is not neutral and ultimately cannot be divorced from the political. As we saw from yesterday's presentations, based on the Helmand and Nile rivers, data can be claimed, can be used in different ways by different actors for different ends. So some of the questions I've been asking myself are, we understand sort of the risks that data may be involved with exacerbating existing tensions or increasing new and additional risks related to conflict and water. But now what? So first of all, a really interesting question that Aaron posed yesterday is, how do we ensure that data is framed and interpreted in an accurate and helpful way? That it's interpreted in a way that decreases tension instead of increasing risk. In addition, it's not just about the agencies and companies that collect the data, but also the intermediaries that may be processing and interpreting this data for different stakeholders in transboundary water negotiations, for instance. I also think it's important we move beyond just anecdotal understandings of how data is abused or misused, and especially to understand what this would mean for learning how to enable accountability or to put into place the necessary guardrails to prevent new additional tensions or possibly even conflict. So, no pressure on our panelists, but it's really essential that policymakers understand and take action, and that will really be important for this brave new world. And with that, I'd like to welcome today's session moderator onto the stage, Erin Salzberg, who is generously standing in for International Crisis Group's Alyssa Jobson, who had to bow last minute because she's ill. Erin, the stage is yours.
I really don't want to stand up here, so I'm going to try and get that mic so I can be roving around. Thank you, both of you. I thought that was a great summary from the first two conversations and of what we're trying to do today, so I think that's great. And what we're really hoping to do is now to move some of those more maybe technically focused conversations squarely into the political domain. How do we respond to some of these challenges? How does it impact our politics over transboundary water? How do we respond to them, both as governments engage, but as institutions engage on these issues globally? And so we're really excited to have a great set of panelists. I'm going to invite you all to join me up here, if you don't mind. It's a little bit tight seating, but I'd like to welcome up Tanya Mishkova. She's the ambassador in charge of water diplomacy and the circular economy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia. I'd also like to invite up Soros Jha. He's the global director for the World Bank Group's Global Water Practice. Ante Rutavaria, he's the special envoy for water at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Lama Rajus, who's the fundraising and partnership officer at the WSP. And I'm really excited to have all of you guys here. And some of you have been involved in some of our earlier conversations around this. And in fact, let me see if I can turn this on. Does this work? Okay. Good, because this way I can walk down and I can actually look at them as we start to ask some of these questions. And this will be an interactive conversation. So I'm going to kind of tee it off with a couple of questions following up on what we've done the last couple of days. But I'm hoping that they will start to engage each other, and you guys can engage as well too. So you just have to raise a hand or something and let me know if you want to talk. But maybe, Tanya, I kind of wanted to start with you, if that's okay. And this is a question that we began to explore a little bit yesterday. But again, I really want to shift towards this more political perspective, and that's, how do you see, from clearly a politician's, diplomat's perspective, technology and innovation shaping geopolitics over water?
Technology and innovation can definitely help. We saw also from yesterday examples, it can be a big obstacle. But for example, when you have a basin where one of the major obstacles to cooperation are entrenched narratives, mistrust, faulty concepts, misconceptions, perceptions. I think one of the important tools that the water diplomacy should use is social media. And it's a tool that I think so far has not been explored, but maybe should be. because social media are greatly contributing to shaping the perceptions, opinions of the society. And when you have situations where politicians have contributed to building a certain narrative that's preventing the country, even if the political will changes, it's the prevalent narrative that is now preventing the politicians to engage. I think the social media campaign by Water Diplomacy can be helpful in this regard. So I think this is one window of opportunity we're yet to explore.
And so when you're talking about social media, you're talking about governments who are engaged in these discussions using social media to address myths that might exist? I mean, you're not talking about, let's say, people on the ground using social media to influence the political conversations. You're talking about the politicians using social media to shape the landscape and build support for agreements, or?
It again depends on the situations, Yesterday or the day before yesterday, I attended a session where they were talking about football players, as influencers, influencing or raising awareness on the importance of water. And something that's been on my mind for a long time, that, footballers in some countries, are more influential than their presidents, and people pay more attention to what they're saying. So as I said, it depends on the context, but we should use, in certain arenas, of course, it's, the water diplomats or mediators who can do that, but in certain arenas where we're talking about secret diplomacy, of course, we have to use other ways, and why not footballers?
Okay, so you work on Messi, and I'll work on Sachin Tendulkar. For those of you who know cricket, right, he's the world's greatest cricketer we've got, so maybe between the two of them we could do something. Auntie, I'm going to go on to other questions for each of you, but I just want to give you a second to reflect on that question as well, too, from your perspective of how do you see these new technologies and innovations complicating your life as a diplomat on transboundary water?
My response would be that absolutely it is, because how legit is the information that is floated over to social media, as well as the social media, becoming a tool in the middle of negotiations is disruptive. So it's really difficult to find a space with the negotiators where they would actually be fully present and not posting out something for their internal purposes, pulling down the negotiations. Something I started to think when Tanya was talking was, Finland is a strong believer of a rules-based order in many levels. And I think in one of the sessions, probably the first one, with the WMO colleagues coming very clear that, the private sector can't resolve everything. We need to have the ethic codes. We need to have the standardization. So in that sense, I think that's something that stuck my mind, in a positive way, thinking that, all those many different sides of the coin, more than two, they all has to be present. So we can't just go with one route with the private sector producing data and then governments interpreting it different ways. So a lot of different angles to the topic.
Yeah, I think this came up in some of our earlier conversations, the idea that even how you present data can change the political landscape around particular issues. And often our data providers aren't sensitive to those kinds of issues that, let's say, the diplomatic community might be more in tune to. I mean, do you see data providing, the role of diplomats in trying to shape the narrative around data and the way we introduce data and laying the groundwork for data introduction in a way that might promote cooperation?
Well, absolutely, and maybe not just the diplomatic services, but we also have the security and intelligence systems in place. So I think it would be a little bit naive to think that we as water people, we would be the users and the influencers of the data information in different negotiation tracks. Most often it's the more powerful sides of the government who are interpreting the data in a way that it fits their own agendas, because I think this we try to make a really clear distinction with when we talk about transboundary water cooperation, that is when the countries are in a positive space. They want to create positive development for all the countries in the basin. While in the water diplomacy space, countries are not yet there. They don't have arrangement, they don't have an agreement, they absolutely don't have an institution together. So in that space, they are still all really tightly linked with their own national narratives, and they are pushing that national agenda as far as they can. But then, if we're able to navigate with the different tools of water diplomacy, those difficult waters, somehow utilizing the data and information in a way that it's not tilted by the intelligence services for their own purposes, then just hopefully they might end up into that cooperative space.
Yeah, Tanya, you've mentioned things around using that data and technology to address some of the myths that might exist around somebody to help advance a diplomatic agenda. I mean, do you still feel that way? Is that?
Yeah, definitely. Because, narratives are very difficult to change, like perceptions of, how people look at water as a national treasure, something that's, in some countries, it has the status of sanctity, godlike status. So, sharing of waters in that kind of narrative and atmosphere, the concept of sharing of waters is very difficult. So how do you go about changing those very, deeply entrenched concepts? It's a very difficult undertaking. And a part of this change also needs to be, I think, through the use of social media. But I may be wrong, but it's just, I think, an idea worth exploring.
So social media, data, new technologies are kind of shaping this geopolitical environment. Lama,
and science, scientific, propositions, scientific proposals can always be huge, being a huge advantage, but science is something that is difficult to interpret by the public. So again, you need interpreters of science to communicate with the public for them to understand. So again, I think here is where social media play a role.
No, it's a great point. It's one we talked about a little bit yesterday, because the uncertainty, particularly around, let's say, forecasts and climate projections as they relate to transboundary negotiations, are extraordinarily complicated. And communicating those uncertainties in a way that doesn't alienate parties or doesn't actually truthfully portrays what we know and don't know is actually an art. It's a very difficult thing to do. Lama, we've talked a little bit about some of the things that are shaping this environment. I'm curious about the stakeholders. I wonder if technology and innovation, is this increasing the stakeholders that we have engaged in transboundary? I mean, what does this mean for those who are engaged in these?
Thank you so much, Aaron, for this question. And I would really want to also thank Tanya and Antti for their perspective. Of course, there is no another way to answer this question. It's really positive impact on the rise of new actors on this sector, because technology allowed us, I would say, democratize the process of and the flow of information between different level of actors. We have people. Literally, they are not involved in any of the processes, but they are impacted by the water issues in their countries, and they are producing information for all of us to see about how they are dealing with these difficulties. Social media platforms, being, as you mentioned, is a really a place where a mass production of this information coming from the public. Also, Antti, you raised a lot of concerns with the rise of new actors, what now we call them the citizen journalists, who are not professional journalists, but they are producing this information. There is many issues coming with misinformation or the myths that come or the understanding of a certain issues that could be challenging for their government or other government across borders. But also there is the positive side that we have access to this information and different realities that these actors live on a daily basis.
Yeah, this also came up a little bit yesterday, not just misinformation, but disinformation,
Yeah.
and parties that might be using these networks in order to shift the discourse around some of these issues in ways that are not productive and not helpful. I mean, are there other actors that we have to be concerned about engaging in this space?
Definitely. I mean, I'm talking also from a perspective of researcher. So I did that a lot of research about what is the downsides of this issue. We have this all big data information that we cannot verify right away. It's also a place for people, let's say, call them the bad guys, who want to fuel conflicts or want to change certain opinion for the public to go in a certain direction. And also that's what Tanya touched upon in her answer, that some of the information that can be interpreted by the public in a different way. And yes, believe me, many actors will take this opportunity to make sure that there is they are influencing the public in a certain directions. But I would also, or answer this question on a positive note, that the rise of new actors, the rise of these new problems, also there are many participants or new actors who are trying to solve these issues. So you have a lot of fact-checking initiatives, for example, led by these citizen journalists. They are also, again, we go back to not professional, but they want also to check the news for other people. A lot of open source investigation that they are looking for this information over and over before publishing it outside. They are picking up those disinformation and trying to give the counter data or like prove that there is a problem here, or there is some actors that they using this information for their own agendas, let's call it.
Yeah, the idea of cherry picking, both from not just science, but now from journalism and even social media, in ways to build a narrative around an agenda that might not be true at all. A really interesting set of challenges. And I know we got a lot of folks in the audience who can also reflect on this, so I'm looking forward to hearing from them too. I am going to come back to you, Antti, in a second to ask how governments, and you, Tanya, as well, how governments deal with these things. But I do want to start with Sarosh a little bit, only because this is an already complicated issue that's now getting a lot more complex. You are the world's largest investor in water. How can we actually build institutions that are capable of leveraging some of these new technologies and innovations to promote transboundary water cooperation?
Thank you very much. I wanted to say something before I come to your question. So we are currently engaged in, let's say, about 40 transboundary water situations around the world. The World Bank is engaged either in technical assistance or financing. And at least 5 of which I was personally involved as director for the Middle East in the last 5 years, and as director Central Asia for 4 years, a couple of years back. And I always ask this question to myself: why does we get into a situation where governments need World Bank to get involved? It's not about financing. I'm still talking about information, analysis, assessments, fact-finding. Why do they come to the World Bank? And whether this was in Tigris and Euphrates, my recent posting in the Middle East, Amu Darya, Sirdarya, Aral Sea, and many other, I think there is something here which is about credibility, independence, in how we use technology, and technology in a very broad sense of the term. It's not just about data collection and just making data available. A lot of it is about how that data is then used to really analyze, assess, and put facts on the table, and let the parties then determine what is the right course of action rather than World Bank trying to tell them what is the right thing for them to do. And we find ourselves, I was telling somebody before this meeting, I started today at 7 o'clock. Out of my 7 engagements, 4 engagements were on countries, governments trying to have bilateral discussions with me on transboundary water issues in a very confidential manner. It is important for us to reflect. I am part of the broader international community, but we need to keep in mind, in general, we currently live in a world where there is lack of trust in our neighbors, in international system, and beyond. And can technology really provide a system where there's more trust, there's more confidence in each other? We really have to think. And I will not answer the question because you didn't ask, but I will answer the question which you asked.
No, but sorry, this is a really interesting question as the World Bank's role, not technology's role in building trust, but that there's other parties, the legitimacy of the bank in conducting a process to bring data together and to present it in a way that's objective, that's properly caveated and characterized, is an important role that external entities can play in kind of making sure the facts on the ground are understood as best as they can be.
Yeah, and I think again, the way you approach this is that it is not then World Bank doing that work when it is requested, because we do not have all the expertise that is needed. And if I look back in my Central Asia work, we had weekly meetings with the diplomatic community. We had weekly meetings with the civil society organizations in this space. We had weekly meetings with the UNRCs and the UN system to keep them into the loop. So it takes a lot of effort. It's not just a technical exercise. It's an exercise which is about building community, building consensus. It's about a lot of conversation, but in a manner that you are building trust in the system overall in the process. It's a lot of work. It's not just, but I think the technology is a great enabler in terms of how you can make that happen. Linked to that point I also wanted to make is that having simply the technology is not good enough to create trust in the system. Because I have seen, you have to wait for my book to see why I'm saying what I'm going to say now. Because I have seen how technology is used to make assumptions to get the outcome you want. You know, the human mind is very genius. We are very creative people. I can fix the outcome and work backwards to see what assumptions I need to make to really get the outcome I want. And again, I will not disclose it here because, you know, when you work in these kind of positions I am privy to a lot of these conversations, and which I have questioned, which I have resisted. But all this to say that we have to be very careful, and we need a certain level of ethics, values in the way we apply technology. And I think both Auntie and Tanya talked about it, and I think a colleague here on my right also mentioned. I wanted to come to the question also you mentioned, which I think is very, very important. The institutions, national institutions, subnational institutions, and the regional institutions working in that space, how they provide the platform for countries to work in a very inclusive manner and try to manage water resources in a manner that benefits all the countries, is perhaps the most important, but also the most difficult part of the whole transboundary water cooperation agenda. In the work we are doing, but before that in the work I was doing before in the field as the director, what I have felt is that countries, historically, most countries, they do have good national institutions which can really help governments to have that kind of a space in which they can talk to other countries in the region. Very important for us to invest in those national institutions. This is not a priority in many countries, whether these are the national hydrological bodies or hydrometeorological bodies or the data centers, water resource commission, and I would say not just the World Bank, but also other multilateral development banks, UNDP, WMO, UNEP, FAO. There are quite a few of us actually which we are very active in that space. It has received a lot of attention in the last, I would say, 15 years. This is a very high priority for many of us. But I think you find, whichever country I travel, I was in 10 countries recently in Africa, you find somebody from the international system is trying to help countries to have better data, better information, better institutions in that space. So that's definitely a very important foundation, because you cannot create a strong regional institution without a strong national institution. But then that country doesn't engage. The second is the regional organizations, which I think is a space where, because of our discussion we were having now over the years, we all should be very happy and proud that we have helped create, we have facilitated a process which has helped emergence of a new generation of regional organizations in the name of RBOs and the network of these RBOs. I'm so impressed with the work which has been done. And we had no contribution, by the way. We recently held a meeting in Washington on transboundary water cooperation. We had 17 RBOs in the room together. And I cannot tell you how happy I was. And I've started asking myself, why can't World Bank provide assistance directly to RBOs? And guess what? This is exactly what we are working on right now, to see how do we create a mechanism that allows us to provide technical assistance, financial assistance to build the RBOs. And I think I will keep you posted, but we are already working on this. As part of the World Bank's, you'll hear more about it in the coming weeks going into the COP, the World Bank will be announcing 5 global challenges on which World Bank will step up its support to the countries. In addition to country programs, these will also be big 5 global programs, and water is one of the 5. And within water, transboundary water cooperation support to RBOs is a very important component of our support to the countries around the world.
Sorry, thank you very much for that. It sounds like I appreciate the teaser on the upcoming book. We may have a little competition on that, so we'll have to check on that. I really appreciate your comments around trust in the system, because I completely agree with you. And I'm formerly from a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and my idea was to build the process. And if you build a process that people can have faith and confidence in, the results will speak for themselves, and the countries will feel comfortable in that process. But that idea of how do you build processes that parties can have trust and confidence in, critically important, I think makes a lot of sense. Antti, I'm going to turn back to you, and then maybe to Tanya to reflect a little bit on how, given some of these complications that we've heard around the impacts and the effects and the stakeholders involved, and the need to build these processes that can reinforce trust and cooperation, how does this change the way Finland is going to approach addressing transboundary water challenges in other countries, or even in your own bilateral relationships?
Well, I will start off by, emphasizing on top of the rules-based order, also to say that the inclusion point was something that we really do appreciate. I think the new technologies are really enabling us to get the information from the crowdsourcing, getting the social data, economic data that makes sense. But something that we probably as a society should keep our eye on it should be on the sort of downward and upward accountability, so that we don't just produce something which is not flowing back to the people. And how do we also maintain that integrity of the data on the process? The other part I would like to in this context also talk about was we saw the words digital colonialism on the screen earlier, and Saros has big pockets, a lot of money in the pockets, but then this is water sector. What is very big funds for us is peanuts when we talk with military spending, or peace spending. So we really need to think that, well, are these technologies initially made for the military uses, like the satellite analysis tools, and through there somehow we divert the technologies to work for us in water and the peace front. And here the different technologies, and back to the colonialism, whoever owns the software or the technology or holds the patents is actually then holding the keys for the data, for the information, and for the narrative. Let it be then that country X creating a narrative on the third country. So if not colonialism, there is at least a polarized competition on a global geopolitics level on the digital issues and techs. And probably we as a water sector don't have much of influence there, but we need to be aware of that. We just pick up some technology which is created, in US. How does that speak to people in rural South Sudan? I don't know. But we need to be aware that there are different issues behind there. I wanted to mention also that in one of the Finnish peace mediation organizations, they have created a technology where they bring the parties into one room and they look at the different positions and interests that the parties hold. And through there, they can map out like which discussions would need to first take place so that they will unblock the following topics. And I think that sort of technology is probably pretty simple. But then again, if you think about a peace mediation or water diplomacy process, where you have a really complicated set of difficult positions of countries, and they don't even want to open up what their real interests in the process are, a technology which then, safeguards that they don't tell to the others that what is their real interest, but the software will show that, okay, now you 3 or 4, you should start with this topic, even though everyone might think that it's complete nonsense. But it will be the one that unblocks the issue. So technology really opens up avenues. And now I'm looking a bit, Aaron, and I forgot what your question was, but I don't care.
But actually, the question was what tools you might start bringing into this diplomatic space, and so you can keep going. Yeah. But you raise an interesting point that hasn't come up in the last 3 days, which is games. The idea of technology is now allowing us to run scenarios and to encourage gameplay between parties in ways that might allow them to better understand some of the challenges, some of the issues, and some of the interests in ways we couldn't do before. And artificial intelligence might enable that to happen in a way that's not adversarial and not necessarily assigning blame. That's a really interesting application, and that's something that maybe you didn't mean to say, but I'm interpreting that from what you did say, so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. But then again, maybe I mentioned that I'm a water person, but then again, I'm sitting in our ministry in a peace mediation center, and that's a pretty sort of a strong understroke saying that we as in foreign ministry see that water is no longer just wells in Africa or sanitation, hygiene issues. Important they are. But really, a lot of these conflicts have water somehow behind there. And then, of course, we have the whole set of foreign ministry tools available. Let it be creating a safe space for negotiation, have a track 1, 2, 3 round tables, or whatever analysis we need to bring, or get the right people into space. But it goes beyond. I think we have access to the whole society in a way that at times it's not foreign ministries. Maybe we convene the parliamentarians to meet and try to influence the politics of the countries in a way that the negotiation could somehow proceed. Thanks.
As Lama pointed out, there's new classes of stakeholders that we need to find creative ways of engaging in these processes, if not to give them a seat at the negotiating table necessarily, if nothing else, to help build the space for agreements within a country or a community. And I think that really matters. The other
Can I
point,
just say one sentence before you to the next colleague?
Yeah.
But I want to say that at times also inaction, if we can have nothing happening, is also a good result. Because at least we are not moving backwards. So we also, in some cases, spending a remarkable amount of time to making sure that we maintain a dialogue channel, for example, in place, even though we know that it's not moving ahead. But let's maintain the channel.
We haven't talked about that either, but I wonder about this as a former diplomat in water. The pace of things has gotten very rapid. And artificial intelligence, email have sped things up at a huge rate. And sometimes you're right. Sometimes these processes just need to sit And the parties just need to sit, and time doesn't heal all wounds, but time can allow positions to evolve and people to appreciate other things. We may not have the advantage of that time anymore with the way social media is pressuring us to act today, and we don't have those opportunities. It's an interesting point. And when, Tanya, I don't know, did you want to reflect a little bit on that, but also on how these things might be changing the way Finland is approaching? I don't want to lose the other thought you raised, which is, and I appreciate this from the World Bank, many of our donor partners, I know this is happening in the United States, I gave credit to the US government as well, you know, they're contextualizing these water issues within a broader water security framework, whether it's WASH or sanitation. They're still tying this back to the fact that we need to provide secure and reliable supplies of water generally, which does include how we not only deal with broad water resources management, environmental concerns, and transboundary water. So I appreciate that point as well. Sorry, Tanya.
Yeah, I wanted to touch upon...
And by the way, I'm going to turn to people for questions. I'm sorry for interrupting. So please do start raising your hands if you want me to tie you into this conversation. We'd love to hear from you.
I wanted to touch upon the geostrategic aspects of new technologies and how they can change the balance of power in a basin. For example, you have countries that used technological advancement to reduce their dependence on water on upstream countries. So with the introduction of desalination, reuse of water, use of new water sources, they actually significantly reduced their dependence. Therefore, the dynamic in that basin profoundly changed. So now, the country that used to be dominant is now no longer in this position, which can level the ground for then a more fruitful cooperation. I think this, another example, I see Gideon was in the room. Yeah, I think a great example is also ECOPI's Middle East project on creating interdependence between Israel, Palestine, and Jordan in their Blue Green Deal, right? Yeah. Basically creating, interdependencies with renewable energy from Jordan in return for desalinated water from Israel and Gaza. So I think, in this way, technology can really change, the balance of power and create either, can equalize the negotiating space or create new opportunities for cooperation. And yesterday we touched, you touched upon a very important question, which is the trust in data, and we spoke about it today as well. And I want to give a good example from my region, which is from the Sava River Basin, on how to create that trust. For example, after devastating floods in Bosnia in 2014, the Sava River Basin Commission then developed a very sophisticated flood forecasting and early warning system. And what, many basins have such a system, but what's unique about this one is the way it's structured. So the host server is in Slovenia, and then there are 3 backup systems that are in other riparian countries. And this creates the sense of ownership and shared responsibility. So you create trust in this data that the system is producing. You own the data, so you trust the data. It's a very important, I think, technological contribution to the matter of trust.
No, and you raised a really interesting point about changing the balance of powers. I don't know, Saroj, Lama, does this keep you up at night? The idea that the processes that we run or data that we make available may actually change the balance of power between parties in these negotiations? Is that something we have to be concerned about?
Maybe I can go first, since it's also part of a question of my PhD research. So it is something really keeps me up all night, definitely. Because as Antti also mentioned, that who own these technologies and who's disseminating this information and how this information is presented, it is a form of power at the end of the day. And also I go to Tanya's point of trust. Who says the truth or these facts also matter to the general public. So even if we are having very fantastic report with a lot of data in it, not really probably talking to the general public in their language, but maybe it's really, let's say it is a very fancy report, and this report is published by untrusted party. What does that mean to the general public? They won't trust the data at the end of the day, and they will question also the intention of kind of this information coming from a certain parties. So of course there is, we go to the power balance issue. For me it's also the issue of ownership. It is important because if this information coming let's talk about water sector. If this information coming about water resources from external country about another country, there is a lot of questions of like, okay, why this information coming from an outsider, I would call it, and then you will question all the intentions of these parties or countries that trying to bring maybe new information or trying to bring solution to the countries in questions. But if this data coming from institutions of the same country or people who are working on the ground trying to bring up this information, maybe to make progress for diplomatic processes or for negotiating, that will be really different sound of it on the general public. And why I'm also bringing the general public again and again, because this is what importance to stabilize the processes, the diplomatic processes or the negotiation. At the end of the day, and we saw that in many countries, that also through digital technology or social media platform, there was a change in the political system, and that changed the parties who were sitting on these negotiation tables. So we really want to keep in mind the general public when we are addressing and bringing this information to
That's a great point. Those stakeholders have a way of making their views known, even if it's not through social media. So it's a great point. Suresh, do you want to add to that before I turn to a question here?
I think it'll be good to take questions from the participants in this meeting, but I was trying to reflect on Tanya's point on technologies offering opportunities for changing the geostrategic balance and dependence on resource over time. I agree with that analysis because I can see today in 3 or 4 river basins where increasingly the downstream countries, first of all, even before going into more broadly technology, are trying to prioritize more efficient irrigation system, more water conservation programs, more nature-based solutions for recharge of groundwater, wetland restoration, and so on and so forth, more natural storage. So I think it is creating definitely a new dynamic, but my own analysis is that in real life today, not academically, the climate crisis actually has become the real game changer. Because suddenly people realize that even this whole concept of upstream, downstream is very fuzzy now. Because the real upstream country is not the upstream country. Because the upstream country also receives rainfall, which actually receives from the clouds, and those clouds actually come from some downstream countries. I don't know whether anybody from Potsdam Scientific Institute is here. So that concept is already there in the Global Commission. Professor Johan Rockström, he always talks about it. But what I'm seeing now, more downstream countries are coming to the World Bank, and I'm sure they're going to you as well, for help in designing more programs for investment in water resource management, irrigation and drainage services, moving more towards more productive, water efficient agriculture, and of course trying to see how all this can then connect to climate finance, carbon market, and so on and so forth. I see that as a very big factor since it did not come into the discussion. But second, definitely when you start doing it, you start relying on technology. How do you get more water efficient irrigation systems? So you start looking at the drip system or more advanced sensor-based, remotely controlled irrigation system which allows you to use water when you need it. And you can use your smartphone really to operate your irrigation systems. So I think we are definitely seeing a lot more interest from governments, from farmers' organizations to use more and more technology to conserve water so that you don't depend actually on other countries, other organizations, etc. for water.
Yeah, I hate to think this way, but again, I came from a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Antti was raised the idea of these also create vulnerabilities, our dependence on these technologies, and these are technologies that can be adopted and used by other actors, and these are important things to think about. Gidon.
Thank you, Aaron.
Introduce yourself.
Gidon Bromberg from EcoPeace Middle East, here with Nada Majdalani as well, Palestinian and Israeli directors. I wanted to comment on trust building and the use of empowering local experts, not just to gain trust in the data, but as a means to actually help build political will. Because if we hire the local experts for common fact-finding, so in EcoPeace we will always have a local group of Palestinian experts, Israeli experts, Jordanian experts, working in parallel and then working together so that we come out with we try at least to come out with some commonly agreed facts based on a set of data that at least we try to get the sides to agree on the validity of that data. But I think that the benefit of that goes beyond, because then you have the possibility to have your local expert, and particularly if the government has used that expert before, that helps create political will, because the government trusts that expert. So when that expert comes and speaks in Arabic or in Hebrew to the respective government, we've found that you're more likely to advance the creation of political will than necessarily having international experts come in who maybe one side agrees with, doesn't agree with, and in any event, it doesn't create the local resources, the local expertise that you need in the long term. In any event, I'd be keen to hear, whether in the diplomatic processes that you've led, working with the local experts on both sides of conflict zones is something that you would prioritize. And then to Tanya's comment on social media, I think it's such an important untapped or insufficiently tapped resource. We need to understand that the spoilers, that those that don't want to see agreements reached, are everywhere in social media. And if we fail to engage in social media, then we're leaving that space to a very powerful sector that prevents us from creating the political will that's needed. So engagement is critical. I think what's often missing here is donors are scared to support civil society engaging so blatantly with social media. It can often be seen as illegitimate or as propaganda. And here too, I'd love your thoughts on, to what extent is the donor community ready to support engagement in social media?
Sorry, did you address it to somebody or?
It's for all of us?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. Actually, we can. And I had this question in mind also for the rest of the panelists as well. It's like, so I will place it as well with the addition to the question that you placed to the other panelists, but more broadly on the citizen science initiatives that's already happening, solutions that produced by local communities, or research information that's already out there, and how donors, government institutions, diplomatic missions also taken that into consideration and taken these initiatives into consideration. So I would really love to hear from the rest of the panelists.
If I say something, I don't know if I agree with Gidon you completely. I sort of think that it's either or. And you mentioned time, and in the negotiation process, which could last for years, I'm sure that there are times when it really makes sense to use the local people, and you have to be really careful that you select the right local experts. But there also might be times when you really just want to go with the international ones, and that comes to sort of a strategic thinking that is always required there, whoever is running the peace mediation process. I think that the key is that the parties of the dispute or conflict, they are the ones who resolve the dispute. The external parties are there, often invited observers, whose role is really to build that trust, build that confidence. And then they have to think twice, like, what is now the right way to go ahead? Is it then those local experts, or does it backfire if we do that? And, we talk about innovation, so I just want to say that the satellite analysis imagery is typical trust-building tool, because, of course, in a negotiation, each party have their own set of data, and they interpret the situation completely differently because it's for the benefit of their own. So there the observers can have the satellite imagery, and at least they would know what is the reality and truth. And they would know in the process that who is speaking the closest to the truth, and creating that type of trust. But I want to leave this with the discussion of time, because I think that's extremely crucial, and maybe I mentioned it yesterday, but we've been discussing in Finland a lot about tipping point, that are in these processes some sort of a tipping point, and if we fail to pass that tipping point, everything becomes extremely difficult. Your region is a typical example. We probably passed the tipping point decades ago. On the Nile, it was 2011. Then again, we have South Caucasus, so Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, who have not yet passed the tipping point. So there is, hope to resolve the issue easier way.
Suroj?
I usually always agree with Auntie, but on this one I'll have to very politely put forth my very gentle disagreement. So one is the practice, the other is the whole policy side, And I think let's look at the practice side. In generally what I find is that the governments find it very difficult to bring civil society along in the process where, let's say, we are involved. Let me speak on behalf of the World Bank. But our policies are very clear on this, that if we get involved into a riparian dialogue that we organize in response to a request from the riparian countries, we ask the governments in their delegation to include representatives of civil society organizations working on a number of issues: forestry, biodiversity, river conservation, etc. Women's group increasingly. So you will see now that when you have 4 riparian countries sitting in a room, it is not just civil servants from those countries. And I'm talking about a formal riparian process where we get involved in response to a request to the bank, and where our operations policy 7.50, you can Google and see World Bank's OP 7.5, BP 7.5 is triggered. Where we have difficulty is that where there is no formal process of asking the World Bank to get involved. There it is very tricky what happens. And our difficulty in reaching out to civil society organizations and also create kind of a parallel track of conversation so that we get more engagement on this. What I can say is that in the World Bank's work going forward in transboundary water cooperation, I think the engagements of civil society from across the countries in the river basins is going to be absolutely critical. Because I fully agree with you that for us to think in World Bank that the dam safety expertise lies only in people who are sitting in Australia and Norway is not correct. We live in a world today where there's just so much of local expertise as well about their dams and how the dams are being managed. So how do we bring international and local expertise into that space and make this very central to our business model for delivering our support to the countries in river basins? And this is going back to the point you were asking. National capacity, regional organizations, how do we build that capacity? That is where I think it is going to be very important. I'll give you an example. I'm taking a bit extra time. I was in a situation where we were discussing, is this dam going to increase earthquake risk for a country? We had 3 top seismological experts, 2 in the room, 1 connected on the video screen. And the delegation from the government also included earthquake experts in the room from their government, from their country, from their university, from geotech agency, 3-4 of them. Presentation was made. The three international experts said, etc. The Minister for Water raised objection on the comments made by the 3 international experts, saying that we do not agree with the observations made by the 3 international experts that this dam will not increase the earthquake risk and so on and so forth, etc. That they had taken into analysis what they call probable maximum earthquake, PME. Those of you who work on this will know this PME analysis. Guess what happened? One of the earthquake experts of the country from which the minister had disagreed with the observations of the 3, he raised his hand. And he said, from a science perspective, an engineering perspective, we share the observations made by experts from a foreign country in terms of the probable maximum earthquake analysis and so on and so forth. This was such a big help to move the conversation forward. What I'm trying to say is that a bit of independence, a bit of credibility outside the independent perspective helps, but we cannot just overlook what may reside in that country, in the civil society, academia, think tanks, women's group in that space. And for us, the challenge is to find a very creative way of blending the two depending on what the political economy would allow in the different situation. And each situation is very different, trust me. I think an environment, Gideon, in which you are operating is very unique. And I think in that environment, the work you're doing is just phenomenal. But we would have to see how this is used in different settings around the world. And people are looking at your experience, as you know already, as to how we can borrow that idea, experience, experiment in other areas where things are really not going well.
Thanks, that's a very important point. I am going to go back to your point, Gideon, for a second, though, because I hate tweeting. I hate that social media space. And I hate it because if I'm talking to Auntie Lama, Sarosh, Tanya, and I'm explaining something, they're hearing it from their own lived history and their own lived context, and I can see whether or not they're understanding what I'm saying the way I intended it to be meant in that lived context in real time. In social media, I can't do that. And in negotiations and in very sensitive issues like this, I feel for me to put something in that space without understanding that context of how that lived experience of the people who will be reading it will be impacting how they understand what's being said is a huge risk. And it gives you an opportunity to be mischaracterized, completely misunderstood, and it would, in these spaces, you make one mistake and you're dead to those people, right? You're gone, and that's a hard thing to recover from. So I struggle mightily with that, but that's me personally.
Thank you so much. My name is Lisa, and I work with Global Water Partnership and Transboundary Water Cooperation, but I'm also a junior rapporteur. So thank you so much for this exciting discussion. And my background is in international law and in interstate disputes, and what Sarosh said about supporting national institutions that can advise governments on how to make decisions that will benefit all of those that have interest in this water resource made me think about the geopolitics of water in a sense of international waters. We've seen quite a lot of accidents at sea, so to speak, where we had disputes, for example, over who gets to fish in the international waters or who gets to trade, that was a completely different age. But now we have essential infrastructure, such as, for example, the electrical cables, the internet cables, the wind farms, and other infrastructure of the country that is going much further into the international sea. So my question is, the technical bodies that are often in charge of managing those, they most often don't read the journalist investigations online that, make use of all of the open data of what's happening. So what could be the role of the foreign ministry talking to these technical bodies that are managing the infrastructure and advising them not only on the meteorological data and the water quality, etc., but telling them, look, this is the risk that is coming, this is what we're seeing, and this is how we can advise you to manage it. So not only being prepared on the civil defense side, but the other side. So what could be the role of foreign ministry in these instances?
Auntie Tanya?
Well, I don't know if I really can provide a direct answer, but something that caught my ear was that we really don't tell much. So I think the foreign ministries are mostly using convening power, leveraging the right people in the room, making sure that there is dialogue and facilitate and mediate, and really trying to bring the data, the truth on the table. So in that sense, sort of, the observers are on the outer circle. It's the parties who are doing the hard work, and they are the ones who come with their differently interpret data. And it depends on their will, how much they want to engage the external parties or the observers into the process. And these are different scales, of course. I suppose it's no secrecy that on the Nile there was a time when the World Bank was really tightly asked by the parties to be in the table and do that interpretation work. And then there has been times when the parties have been a bit more on their own. And having observers, but still keeping them a bit hand length away.
Tanya, do you want to add to that? Oh, sorry, Sarosh, please.
I'm extending your question, but I think you're raising a very important point, which is the transboundary water space is also the space where there are collateral benefits and damages. Because increasingly that space, you have all the other areas of engagements, whether it is energy, where you have tourism, you have the whole digital infrastructure that you were mentioning, etc. You have the whole, I hate to use that word, but the gas trade increasingly among the country, that space is being used. And the interdependence of the countries in terms of who's talking to who, Auntie is quite right, it is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but you'll find the Ministry of Energy leading the discussion on gas trade and the electricity transmission projects. You have the Ministry of Technology and Digital looking at the telecom, looking at the whole fiber network, etc. So what I'm saying is that how do we then make sure that the collaboration in the shared water space is not just within the water sector and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we look at all the others who maybe potentially have very high stakes in the process. In one example, again, I cannot disclose that, in one case where we realized that the project itself in the transboundary space, a project, can be very sensitive conversation. But if you leave that aside and talk about many benefits of countries working together in the regional space in terms of energy, agriculture, irrigation, ag business, etc., you find that the common benefits coming from that cooperation in the non-water sharing space is just many more times than actually just talking about that particular project. Is that a good enough argument for countries to change their position and be a bit more softened to have a conversation on project plus on the table? You just realize that, I think, and as Auntie was saying, that these things take time. It's because historically, the many countries that we are working with today, they are very young nations. Their institutions are very young. I'm talking about particularly developing countries where we work. So it needs time, it needs patience, it needs continued engagement. Things that I'm working on today because I inherited a lot of work done by my predecessors. And we got to really realize that we are on the journey in which many actors will come, will keep adding to this agenda, and then you'll see progress. 10 years, 15 years. Average time span today we are seeing in transboundary water cooperation is 10 plus minus 3 years. The complex ones, in terms of agreeing on the agreement, joint investments, investment sharing, dispute resolution mechanism, converting this into a treaty, and some kind of an international mechanism to support that process. So 10 plus 2 plus 4, I mean, you're looking at anywhere from 7 to 15 years. Many of us will think that who has patience? And so sometimes I feel, because World Bank by design is an institution which works on projects which have a life cycle of 7 to 15 years. This is how we work. We cannot work on a small project of 1 year. It doesn't work. Our scale of economy is very different. So I think it is our leaders, many years back, they created these institutions because they wanted different institutions to focus on different issues. And I think the need for us to look at water in a broad, multi-sectoral context, because water connects so many other sectors, I think the more we understand, more we practice it, the more sustainable water cooperation will become.
Tanya.
Yeah, what Sarah just said encouraged me to also complement what the World Bank is doing, because it's bringing to the table projects that go beyond water. And sometimes this is what it takes to move, to create the political will to engage in cooperation. And I know this from my own region, where the politicians won't get out of bed and sit at the table just because it would be beneficial, for water. But if you tell them, okay, this is an investment project, 2 billion, and it has this benefits, it will, create more jobs, and it will help the energy sector and solve your issue here and, here and in several sectors, then yeah, they will get out of bed and they will get, you will get them at the table. So I think, this approach is in some cases, I'm not saying it will work in every situation, but I know in the region where I come from, this often it's a motivating factor that helps bring politicians to the table.
No, I think that's right. And Saroj, again, I appreciate you bringing up this time element, because I do think there's a disconnect between the time it takes for these processes to work, which are long-term peace-building, cooperation-building processes, compared to the rapid pace that information, knowledge, technology is being exchanged. This is a little bit of a tension that we have to work through. One more question, because our panel has been very, I appreciate the time you've given us, and I know, Saroj, you have to get quickly onto a plane. So one last question, and then I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to give a quick one-sentence wrap-up. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. My name is Yasir Muhammad. And I would like to ask the questions about who are the beneficiaries of this data. I mean, I'm coming from the Nile region, so I will try just to link it to the water management in the water managers in the Nile or the dam operators. Some of the data can be extremely useful for those managers. I mean, imagine the situations there where internet is a problem, and sometimes electricity itself is a problem. So there is some data can be extremely useful for those operators, and now they are very accurate. For example, the water level of a dam, the water level of reservoirs behind the dam. These data sets now becoming extremely accurate. And this data is not shareable among the countries. So if this data become available to the riparian states, for example, I take Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, this will already create some trust on this set of data. But if you go to another set of data like water consumption, for example, or agricultural water consumption, this is extremely complex data sets because, first of all, it is very political. Each country wants to maximize its consumption because that's very much related to negotiation on water sharing. But at the same time, it is very inaccurate nowadays. Maybe in some years in the future it become accurate. So my point is that would organizations, for example, providing this data to freely accessible for the users, would it be helpful? I know, for example, rainfall data sets is there for the last 30 years from WMO or from other organizations. It was extremely useful. Some data from EC, MWBF, also extremely useful. So why not to have these data sets on transboundary river basin, at least to start with easy data sets and with time to move with more complex data sets?
Okay, sorry, I'm going to answer this one first. Is our colleagues from NASA here? Anybody? I thought I saw it. There you go. Right, see this guy right here? Sorry, for those of you who don't know, right, the Surface Water Ocean Topography Mission, which, if I understand correctly, we're now getting resolution down to 50 meters, sometimes less, bodies of water, where we can measure the altimetry, right, the height of that surface water down to 10 centimeters, or we've gotten better there too? About 10 centimeters. That data is publicly available. The processes, the software, a little bit challenging to work through, but right now there's a whole process to be able to get that capacity out to countries so they can use that data. You can look at a swimming pool in anybody's country, anywhere, and understand what their water levels are. This is, right? This is going to remove a huge curtain around transboundary water. So you're going to see this stuff happening, and talk to our NASA colleagues. They might be able to help you with that. Sorry, did you guys want to add on that technology point? No? Once, twice? Oh, Jay, all right. You get 2 minutes, and that's it. Okay.
So yeah, I'm a former senior water scientist from NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It's quite true about the ability of SWAT and altimetry and other satellites to be monitoring this stuff, but I think that there's a big disconnect between the availability of those data, the accessibility of the data, and the trust in the data. So, I visited the Three Gorges Management group 10 years ago and showed them that we could see exactly that, and they immediately, started arguing in Chinese and tried to discredit us and showed us the door.
And that's going to happen, but those are the kind of conversations you want to happen. We have to go. I want to let you guys, Sarosh has to go. I want to turn to you guys for final words or final comments about this broader issue of technology and geopolitics, how it's influencing your work. Sarosh, first to you, so that if you need to, you can step off the stage.
No, I just want to thank you, and it really sounds, I have to go because somebody is waiting for me for a bilateral, and today I have not been able to keep up with my time. I think this is a great discussion, and all that I can say is that we want to work with all of you in taking this agenda forward, and I'm extending our hands to governments, academic organizations, civil society to work on this. This is not one organization can fix this problem. I think we really need to build that coalition which is based on trust, really interest in working together. But we, the World Bank, we are very interested in moving this forward. I know it's very difficult, takes time, but I think we keep the conversations going. But thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Suroj. Tanya, I'm going to turn to you, Auntie, I'm going to turn to you last as one of our co-sponsors. I want to give you that final word. Tanya, did you want to have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I know that, when you say technology and social media, people most of the time, think of negative terms and fears and misuse. But I really, as a water diplomat, I'm trying to see how we can use that technology and use the social media for the good. It's out there, there are people who will never read more than 3 lines. They won't read a newspaper article or watch a documentary series to understand a topic. They will read a tweet or a Facebook, info. So it's many times those people that we need to reach out to and try and change their minds. So, let's use what we have, but the technology as well. It can be a force of bad, but it can also be a force of good. And let's try to make the best out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Lama.
Yeah, I will start with the accessibility part, that the more accessible the technology is to the general public, and the more that we will have actors use these technologies. So I will invite the governments, donors, the negotiation processes to take that into consideration, that there is a use already for accessible technologies by mass of different actors that can be useful for the negotiation and the processes itself. Thank you.
That's great. Auntie.
Thanks. Two things. The first one is that I started to think that time issue, and I just want to leave this session of 3 sessions with the thought that this is actually a train that never comes to stop at the end station. And I'm saying so because, many of you know the Finnish history. We used to be the Ukraine after the Second World War. We lost to Russia or Soviet Union at the time. We lost our main river. We lost several hydropower stations. So very unfair situation where Finland was posed at that time. But 20 years later, we could agree with Soviet Union over all the rivers we share between them. We are actually upstream country and still advocating for the UNECE Water Convention. But now, Russian aggression in Ukraine, and we are back to square one. We respect the contracts we have with Russia, so we do the minimum data exchange. It continues, because we respect the contracts we have, but that's it. After 70 years of very functional, good case example of transboundary water cooperation, and you're back to square one. So let us not think that this, ever ends, but we create a new tools to do this better and hopefully more lasting, so that 70 years is a short period.
I appreciate you saying that, only because you hear a lot of people talking about this is a problem that we need to solve in general about water, and that's not the case. We're going to have this problem every day for the rest of our lives and our kids' lives and forever and ever. And so it's about the processes that we put in place that can sustainably provide cooperation, services, all the things that we want on a day-in, day-out basis. It's not something we can just be done with and walk away. And it's a great message to end with. Thank you to our panel, please. And I wonder if I can invite up, and I know we've gone over time, but maybe quickly invite up my colleague from the Scientific Planning Committee, Martina Klimas, and maybe ask you, we've been over this for 3 days, and I don't want to keep people too long because you guys have sat through a lot. Anything that what were your thoughts coming out of this? Anything we need to walk away with?
Yeah, I think I will start reflecting on Anti's last words, and it makes me think of the evolution of diplomacy, because we went from relations between different rulers, then we moved to nation states, then we had new actors, multilateral organizations, later non-state actors started playing a role, then we moved to media, and now we have technology and artificial intelligence. So I just see it as a natural sign of evolution, and I think it's not something we should be afraid. I definitely will take to my work that we should be more aware of these actors. I work a lot with the fragile and conflict-affected countries, and their brain drain plays a big role. Because although the countries may have access to these different technologies, because many people who would be able to use these technologies, they just left these countries for different reasons. And I think that when we think about rebuilding national institutions, we do have to be aware of this issue of brain drain. And I think that will really impact abilities of some countries to be able to deal with these issues. And then, of course, credibility is needed and trust is needed. And there, the discussion on disinformation, misinformation, that is a never-ending story. I think we all need to be very much aware the role these processes and these play and impact different transboundary negotiation processes, because we see it, how many of the different negotiations can be derailed by very simple Facebook campaigns that cost very little. If you think how much is invested into these processes and then how little is you can do one tweet that is being retweeted, we also know how some of these are actually orchestrated by different actors and how little investment you need to disrupt something. And that is something for us to really think about and take it forward.
Oh, great point. No, I appreciate you making that. I want to thank everybody's time and attention, but Martina, we have some special people we should thank for this session and the seminar series.
I think we really, again, would like to thank our partners, because with this seminar series, we do work on it for 1 year. And our partners were, again, the government of Finland, more specifically Ministry for Foreign Affairs and the Finnish Water Institute, also the World Meteorological Organization, United States Institute of Peace, and International Crisis Group. And I would like to tell you that we are already preparing seminars for next year. If there was something in this discussion that really caught your attention and you would like to say, I want to hear more about this, please do reach out to us, reach out to me or Aaron, and share with us these topics, because we would really like to hear from you. What is it that you would like to know more?
Or if you want to be involved in helping to advance this agenda through Stockholm Water Week, right? This is your chance to reach out to us to talk about transboundary waters and what we can do to build out that agenda in coming events.
Yep, perfect.
Thank you, everyone, for joining
much.
us. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you.